I'm Romesh Hettiarachchi, and welcome to the Lawtrepreneur Briefing. I'm exploring how lawyers and service businesses can adapt to the modern economy. I'm sharing my learning experiences with you so that collectively we can design and build more modern law firms and service businesses. Thanks for sharing your day with me. Let's begin. So I'm Canadian, but I like to think of myself as a global citizen. I've lived in a couple of countries in Asia, and I've traveled a whole lot more. I completed my law school at the University of Windsor, a few miles away from Detroit. In terms of my legal experience, I've had stints in legal aid, human rights law, and family law. And the majority of my background is in commercial law and specifically in litigation. But I now spend most of my time helping businesses adapt to the modern economy. And this includes creating new streams of revenue and developing and designing new business models. I started my own law firm a couple of years ago after asking myself one question: what does a modern law firm look like? What does a modern lawyer look like? And in order to answer those questions and to explore potential answers to those questions, I decided to start my own firm. And my firm and my career is now built on the experiments surrounding my exploration of the answer to this question. So one answer to this question of what does a modern law firm or a modern lawyer look like has a deceptively simple premise. A law firm should reflect the modern economy. But what does that actually mean? The implementation and execution of this idea is far more difficult. By analogy, you could talk about a journey from A to Z, and so you know what the destination Z looks like. But the question is, how do we journey from A to Z? What is the pathway that does that take? And what are the costs associated with? And those costs are, of course, not only financial, but they're also non-financial, such as time. So when I started my firm, it was really an exploration of the factors about how do you journey from A to Z. Throughout much of this journey, there have been trips with unexpected surprises and unanticipated detours. But even through these detours and failures, there have been so many learning experiences. The learning experience of which now form the foundation of my law firm, the foundation of my career, and the foundation of this podcast. So one of the questions that you might be asking yourself is, what is animating or motivating me to put together this podcast? The fact of the matter is that I still remember what it was like to be in law school. I graduated law school in 2010 in Ontario. And I remember even then worrying about what the future of my career will look like, especially since I didn't really have the interest of practicing in the big law firms. So if you're in law school and you're worried about the future of your career in law, or how you're going to pay off these crazy amounts of debts you get into when you go into law school, or if you're a young lawyer and you're simply trying to understand the potential future of your legal career, this podcast is for you. It's frankly the information I wish I had when I started my journey. The good news is that this podcast will give you some tips or some travel suggestions to take with you on your own journey from A to Z. A second motivator behind this podcast is a result of my use of technology. Now, obviously, technology will form the backbone of every law firm of the future. But in my experience, in testing all these new law tech platforms, I found that the design of these platforms don't really consider what it is like practicing law. The legal profession tends to be conservative when adopting new technologies. So what I'm trying to do with this podcast is give a little bit of an insight as to the considerations or the decisions that lawyers make on a daily basis. That in turn will help inform the design of their own user experiences for the legal profession. And the last driver behind this podcast arises out of the need for lawyers to learn from the experiences of other businesses, and in particular, service businesses. One of the themes that will be running throughout this podcast is the importance for the legal profession to adopt some of the best practices of businesses that provide service to customers. And conversely, service businesses that continually deal with customers will have lots to learn from my experience trying to create a modern law firm that is by and large user-centric. And again, I'll elaborate more on this concept in future episodes. So let me set some ground rules for the future episodes of this podcast. Let me start by setting expectations. I'm going to try to keep each episode to less than 15 minutes long. Now, I've spent more than 5 years thinking and working on these problems. What I've learned during this period of time cannot be distilled into 15-minute episodes. On a related point, there are really no easy answers. There's no be-all and end-all solution offered on this podcast. I've got answers that work for me, that work for my firm, that are unique to my experience and unique to practicing in Toronto. I can't say definitively that these solutions and these answers will work for you. I do hope, however, that you can get some nuggets of insight that will help you practice more efficiently, increase your productivity, provide more value to your clients, and maybe see your kids and loved ones more often. And if that happens as a result of something I share, that's fantastic. All I'm trying to do on this podcast is raise questions so that you can each start on your own journey. I'm not going to be spoon-feeding the answers to you. Think of this as if you're a tourist or a traveler. You can talk about traveling to Barcelona or Las Vegas, New York, wherever it is. And in my experience as a traveler, the value is in the journey traveling and not simply the destination. It's about the experiences you have along the way. And that is kind of similar to my experience over the last 2 years. And so I would encourage you to think about this journey similarly. I've also got to be honest, this is not going to be a politically correct podcast. For one, I'm a really straightforward, candid individual. I'm not very good at small talk. And so while I'll try my best to keep this podcast clean, you can expect swear words to slip in when a point needs to be made. In part, it's because I know that the future of the legal profession is not going to look and be the same as its past. The future of the legal profession is not going to be comfortable. And putting you in a place of discomfort, at least I'm hoping, will spark a learning journey. So again, expect me to make you feel uncomfortable and raise issues you don't like hearing about, and then lean into that discomfort, because after all, that's what I had to do 2 years ago. All I'm asking for you at the end of the day is to understand an argument. I'm not asking you to agree with it. And if you can't do that, this is not the podcast for you. This podcast is also not academic. There is lots of theory out there about how to run a law firm and the future of the legal profession. If you're interested in theory, go read it. This is not the place for that. I'm hoping to provide practical insights about what has worked for me in the hopes that you could benefit from it. And lastly, this podcast is not about marketing. I don't care about superficial solutions that dress up really difficult problems. This idea of the lipstick on a pig, I don't give a fuck about the lipstick. I care more about teaching the pig how to become a horse. The fundamental theme that runs throughout the podcast is that there are systemic issues facing the legal profession. And you could dress all those issues up with lipstick. It doesn't matter. We've got to fix the systemic issues. So why the name, the Lawtrepreneur Briefing? Let's return back to the question of what does a modern law firm look like? My answer, the future of the legal profession lies in being entrepreneurial, which means that we have to learn the best practices of successful entrepreneurs and adapt those practices and integrate those practices into our careers, into our firms, and into our profession as a whole. At least that's my answer so far. I'm super stoked to share my learning journey with you in the hopes that together we can build a legal profession and other businesses that more reflect the opportunities and challenges of the modern economy. Talk to you next week. Cheers.